In my Could You Use an 8-Year-Old Laptop video, I discussed how with just a few upgrades, you can make even a really old computer still viable for use today. And not only viable, actually really good for many use cases. But in that video, I discussed how there was one major problem with that route, and that was that once Microsoft stopped supporting Windows 10, those computers will be losing Windows support entirely. And so my question now is Windows 11 ready to be your next operating system? So I was running Windows 10 on both of my computers before now. I say was because I updated one of them to Windows 11 for this video. I did not want to switch immediately because I remember some growing pains when Windows 10 was first released that I tried to avoid back then as well. Uh, Anyone remember the uninterruptible Windows updates that always seem to happen right in the middle of your work? But since Windows 11 has been out for over a year now, surely they got all of those bugs figured out, right? Right? Here is the laptop that I switched to Windows 11. As you can see, I changed the layout quite a bit for me. But the first thing that I noticed was that Windows 11 was obviously designed for touchscreens. And to be honest, it almost looks like everyone kind of ironed all of the icons flat. They don't really have any shape or texture anymore, which seems a little weird. And there were a few other things that got me on first boot. For example, the taskbar is center justified by default with the start button and everything in the middle. And that's obviously designed for touchscreens as well. And I did try it for a week before switching it, but I just could not get used to it. So you can switch it to be left justified. Another thing you notice is when you have like a window that's not full screen, for example, like a file explorer or a browser window, they sort of like rounded off the edges of the window, which gives it kind of a mobile feel. Almost more like the display on a smartphone like the Pixel or like you're using an iPad where they have the rounded display and rounded windows. But now let's get into the user experience. So first, let me say this. I think the goal of an operating system is to get out of your way so that you can get your work done or you can play your games and relax or whatever you want to do on the computer. Now, there are ways where an OS can be helpful. For example, Windows snapping ability, where you can snap a window onto a side or in a corner and it automatically fills up half of the display or just a corner of the display, can be very useful for having, say, a Word document and a web browser side by side while you're trying to get something done. But the thing that drives me crazy when I'm using an operating system is when there's something that I'm trying to get done and they bury it under Windows or it just becomes a hassle to get through all the settings pages to just get what I want to get done. And so that's the lens I was looking at Windows 11 through. And with that said, I will say that the new start button is an atrocity to me. To confirm my thoughts, what I did was I connected the Windows 10 laptop to this monitor here, and I also connected the Windows 11 laptop to this same monitor so I could compare icon sizes and such. And the new start button is significantly larger than the old one, and it has less information on the page. If you want to get to the alphabetical list of apps, you have to go to a separate page from the start button. But that does mean that you'll probably be using the Windows search feature a lot more, which is as good as it was on Windows 10. They didn't really do too much with that as far as I can tell. And speaking of not being able to get to things quickly, what did you do with right-clicking the taskbar? Now, to be fair, if you right-click the start button itself, you get all of the same settings options that you used to get by right clicking this taskbar in Windows 10. But now, if you right click the taskbar, the only thing it takes you to is the taskbar settings menu. That used to be one of the easiest ways to get to the task manager for me. However, there were a few things that I liked that actually helped me get things done quicker or deal with everything I have open better. For example, the new Action Center is quite useful. It seems to take inspiration from like the Control Center on the iPhone or the like settings menu if you swipe down on an Android phone twice and you get the quick access to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and all that stuff. And as someone who usually has way more tabs open than I would like to admit, the ability to just silence the audio source in the Action Center is very useful for when you have that one tab that's making noise and it takes forever to find what you're looking for. They also expanded the snapping feature that I talked about previously in Windows, where now instead of just having it fill out for you, there's a few options that pop up for different orientation styles. And so that can be a little bit more intuitive for people to help them line up windows how they want to get something done. Now, to be fair, I never really thought this was a problem before, but I think the improved user feedback is actually pretty good on this side. Also, there is a new feature for running Android apps in Windows 11. It's not fully fleshed out as far as I can tell. I expect that they're going to expand it more in the future. But it uses the Amazon store and not the Google Play Store, but the Amazon store does have a lot of the same apps as well. But one thing is that it's not quite as easy to use as, say, a Chromebook, which has that sort of feature built in and present at all times. This takes a bit more work. All right, I took a little bit of a break because the rain was coming down really hard, so hopefully it's much quieter now. So you might have listened to all of that and you might be thinking, Taylor, while that is a pretty big update, it sounds, I still don't see why this had to be a new OS. And more so, why does Windows 11 have the strict requirements that it has? Which is a good point. As we saw in the 8-year-old laptop, there are many old computers that are just as powerful or even more powerful than computers that you can upgrade to Windows 11. So, what gives? And so, the main reason is not performance, as we saw in the laptop video. The main reason instead is related to security requirements. To increase security, Windows 11 requires a CPU and motherboard that supports TPM2, a Trusted Platform Module 2. Now, that module is designed to increase security on a hardware level on the computer. And so, with that said, it kind of leaves me conflicted on the hardware requirements. On one hand, increasing security is an obvious win. And with Macs and Chromebooks in particular being able to tout their heightened security as a selling point, Microsoft needed something to be able to write on the box to compete with those two there. But on the other hand, that means that many old computers that are still good and still very usable will likely end up as e-waste once Windows 10 loses its support. Now, to be clear, these computers won't become useless when that happens. It's not like you're gonna go to turn on your old computer one day and the hard drive explodes or something like that. But what it does mean is that Windows 10 will not be getting those security updates anymore. And so without those updates, it becomes much less advisable to keep using that old operating system. And of course, I know that there are alternatives to Windows for these old computers. I'm hoping to make a video one day about using Linux as an alternative to keep using these old computers and keep getting use out of them once we get closer to that end of support date. However, many of the people who have these old computers are not the most techie of people. And they likely don't want to deal with having to learn how to set up their computer or learning how to use Linux. And so, what will probably be much more likely for them is as the date gets closer and they see the news articles and maybe Windows 10 even updates them about the end of support, they'll probably just go to Best Buy or wherever and buy a new computer. So while I appreciate the reason for these requirements for the security, and it is hard to argue against better security, it is unfortunate. Hopefully, what this will mean is the people who are not against putting in the time and getting something out of these old computers will be able to get them for cheap and get some use out of them. You know, maybe a cheap NAS or a gaming server, Minecraft server, or whatever you want to do with these old computers. But we'll have to see what happens. So, to conclude, there are many reasons, such as security, to make the switch over to Windows 11, but I don't like all of the changes personally. Hopefully, with more updates and so on, Windows 11 will become much better, and maybe it'll surprise me in the same way Windows 10 surprised me after finally switching from Windows 7 or 8.1 and become a really good and usable operating system. I just hope they make some of the more power user advanced features more accessible and quicker to get to. But that's all for this video. For better or for worse, Windows 11 is here to stay. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.